What's the hardest thing about writing? Well, it's getting started. Maybe you're having a hard time coming up with a story idea, or you're stuck on where to take your story next. If you want a way into a story or a way through, I have 9 story starters to help you. This free PDF is full of story seeds and prompts to get you going. To download your 9 story starters, go to nancypanuccio.com/start. That's Nancy with an I, Panuccio with 2 C's, nancypanuccio.com/start. This is a key turning point because it's where your main character recommits to the goal, recommits to doing something to change. Writer Unleashed is for you, a writer who has a story you want to bring onto the page and into the hearts and minds of readers. I'm Nancy Panuccio, writer, editor, and writing coach. And each week, we'll explore techniques, mindsets, and inspiration for writing stories readers can't put down. Thanks for spending some time with me today. Now let's begin. What do you do when you have a novel or memoir that doesn't follow the typical plot structure? Not all writers are natural plotters. I would say about half the writers I coach are exploratory in nature. So plotting feels counterintuitive to them and can leave them feeling like the story reads false. Other writers need and benefit from a plot, a roadmap. There's no right or wrong way to write your story. But how do you plot a story that's more of an emotional, internal arc, where the goals and conflicts aren't concrete or external? What if there's no crime to be solved, or tsunami to survive, or an evil wizard to slay? What if your character's only story problem is an internal one? Maybe your character is stuck in a behavior pattern that's destroying his or her relationships. Maybe she's stuck in drug addiction or grief or self-loathing. Your character may feel blocked, lost, alienated, unworthy of love. So they're searching for something that's hard to capture, let alone articulate to a reader. These kinds of stories are often harder to structure or to build a story around. So the question becomes, how do you make it more concrete? How does the internal story manifest in the concrete world of the real? How do you plot your character-driven story? In this episode, I'm going to give you 4 markers to dial in so you can plot your character-driven story. These are 4 thresholds that your character will move throughout your story. But before we dig in, let's talk about the overarching arc of change. I work with many writers who are working on women's fiction or autobiographical fiction. These are often characters who are stuck in some way. They're stuck in addiction or limiting concepts of self. They may be stuck in feelings of guilt or longing. Maybe your protagonist needs to go from unhappy to happy, from addicted to sober, from single to coupled, from grief-stricken to moving forward. For example, if your main character is battling drug addiction, the action has to be becoming sober. If she feels unlovable or self-rejecting, The action needs to be about loving and accepting herself. So, who is your character in the beginning, and who is he or she at the end? In episode 185, we talked about your story's first act, the 25%, which sets up your story. It introduces your main character and his or her story problem or goal. Act 2 is where your character actively pursues that goal, and by the end, there's either victory or defeat. But your character is different internally. He or she has been forced to step into a more actualized version of self. He or she had to overcome emotional conflicts and obstacles to win the day. But here's where it gets tricky. The change is on the inside. It's harder for you to capture on the page and harder for the reader to perceive and track. Your reader needs to know what your character is battling, and they need to see the gradual progression of change. It's all internal, but it should still be manifested in the concrete world. Change only becomes meaningful when it manifests on the outside. With any internal emotional shift, there's always an external change to mirror it. When we change internally, we interact differently with the other people in our lives. Our relationships change. We view ourselves differently. We interact with the world around us in a way that reflects what's happening internally. Change happens gradually, and the narrative tension comes from your character actively trying to change. So, how do you plot? How do you track a character's internal change externally so the reader can perceive it and follow the journey? In this episode, we'll walk through your character-driven plot using 4 key pivot points, thresholds that your character will walk through in each of your 3 acts. And these are helpful even if your story is more reliant on plot than character. All riveting stories hit these pivot points, or what I like to call thresholds, that walk your character through the story. Now, in episode 185, we went over Act 1, your setup, and the 4 things you need to establish. If you haven't listened to that, go back and listen, episode 185. I'll link in this episode's show notes. But to quickly recap, your first act introduces your protagonist and the world he or she lives in, the status quo. It introduces the main story problem, what's at stake, and who or what will cause trouble and impede your protagonist. At the end of Act 1 will be the first threshold. It's where your character realizes that life as he or she knows it is irreversibly changed. In a character-driven story, it's usually a moment of realization. So threshold number 1 is the point of no return. You can think of this as the inciting incident or significant situation. In the hero's journey, it's a call to adventure, which the character initially rejects. Sometimes it's referred to as the catalyst, but ultimately it's a call to change. The point of no return is triggered by a particular event, and it's what ushers your character into Act 2. It invites your character into the fray. Now, this point of no return could be as devastating as a cancer diagnosis, or as joyous as meeting the sexy stranger who just arrived in town on a work assignment. It could be a job offer. It could be a moment where your character realizes something for the very first time, where what they thought was true is reversed. For example, in Jeanette Wall's memoir, The Glass Castle, the protagonist sustains third-degree burn injuries at the age of 3. She was cooking her own hot dogs because her parents were too preoccupied to cook for her, and she set herself on fire. So that's the event. The point of no return for her is when she's in the hospital and realizes what it means and feels like to be taken care of by adults. She realizes for the first time that her parents don't protect or keep her safe. It's a point of no return because it's the first time she realizes, just as we have, that the people she trusts, her parents, are actually a danger to her. We already know this, but it takes recovering from third-degree burns in the hospital for her to realize it. Here's an excerpt. The nurses and doctors always asked how I was feeling and if I was hungry or needed anything. The nurses brought me delicious meals 3 times a day with fruit cocktail or Jell-O for dessert and changed sheets even if they still looked clean. Sometimes I read to them and they told me I was very smart and could read as well as a 6-year-old. Okay, so she goes into some more detail about a particular nurse and then says, that was the thing about the hospital. You never had to worry about running out of stuff like food or ice or even chewing gum. I would have been happy staying in that hospital forever. And towards the end of the chapter, her father takes her out of the hospital. Are you sure it's okay? I asked. You can trust your old man, Dad said. He unhooked my right arm from the sling over my head. As he held me close, I breathed in his familiar smell of Vitalis, whiskey, and cigarette smoke. It reminded me of home. Dad hurried down the hall with me in his arms. A nurse yelled for us to stop, but Dad broke into a run. He pushed open an emergency exit door and sprinted down the stairs and out to the street. Our car, a beat-up Plymouth we called the Blue Goose, was parked around the corner, the engine idling. Mom was up front, Lori and Brian in the back with Juju. Dad slid me across the seat next to Mom and took the wheel. You don't have to worry anymore, baby, Dad said. You're safe now. She knows as well as we do at this point that she's not safe. But it's a point of no return for her. It's the first time she realizes what it means to be safe and protected, and that her family is not doing that. So she's stuck between 2 versions of self. It's a conscious choice, but your character doesn't know what he or she is in for yet. They don't yet know the implications of what lies before them. They're unprepared. So they're suspended in what was and what will be. Now, she's only 3, but she's engaging in the situation. She's not passive. Things aren't just happening to her. She has a particular point of view on what's happening. So there's an event. In her case, she set herself on fire by accident, and that leads to a moment of awareness or some other choice. It's a call to change. It's a turn in destiny. It usually happens over 1 or more scenes. It's where your protagonist is suspended between what was and what will be. It's the point of no return. Okay, let's move on to the next threshold. Now, your character has just stepped out of his or her known world, or what they believed was true, and into the new unfamiliar world. There's no turning back. For Jeanette Walls, her view of her parents will never be the same. It starts her transformation, but she still has a long way to go. She's still a child. So Act 2 is where the real story plays out. Situations where characters are revealed more deeply, they encounter risks as they move forward. There's external and internal movement. It's where they face opposition from other people or within self. It's where the antagonist or antagonistic forces have the upper hand. In the glass castle, it's her parents. So you can think of splitting up Act 2 into two halves. Directly after the point of no return, new challenges and situations arise. Your character faces self-doubt and uncertainty. He or she also discovers some strengths. They also confront limitations. So this is where your character becomes more aware of how they feel, think, and the way they act. But the antagonist has the upper hand. In the glass castle, her parents have the upper hand. They're vagabonds. They move from place to place, from one ramshackle place to another. So on to threshold number 2. This is the midpoint. It happens around midway through Act 2. This is a pivot point for your character. It's where he or she realizes that in order to get what they want, they have to rethink their methods because they realize that what they've done thus far in the first half of Act 2 has been ineffective. They've more or less reacted to things. And this is where your character recommits to the goal. It's a moment of truth. James Scott Bell calls it a mirror moment. It could be a low moment of despair, or it could be a moment of hope. But it's a moment of truth. It's where a secret might be revealed or where the truth of your character's situation hits hard. For Jeanette Walls, it's a realization about false promises. So at the midway mark, her parents move the kids to a place with no plumbing, no electricity. There's a leak in the kitchen ceiling, which her dad never repairs. So the kids try to patch the roof themselves, but to no avail. And whenever it rains in the kitchen. Now, the parents try to make it more habitable. Mom built rows of shelves in the windows and arranged brightly colored bottles to catch the light. Now it looks like we have stained glass, she announced. It did, sort of, but the house was still cold and dank. Every night, for the first few weeks, lying on my cardboard mattress and listening to the sound of rainwater dripping in the kitchen, I dreamed of the desert and the sun and the big house in Phoenix with the palm tree in the front and the orange trees and oleanders in the back. We had owned that house outright. Still owned it, I kept thinking. It was ours, the one true home we'd ever had. Are we ever going home? I asked Dad one day. Home? Phoenix. This is home now. Okay, so it's the midpoint. This is a key turning point because it's where your main character recommits to the goal. Recommits to doing something to change. It's a mirror moment where the character realizes the truth of their situation. So threshold number 1 is the point of no return. Threshold number 2 is the midpoint, a moment of truth. At the end of Act 2, your character will reach another threshold. Threshold number 3, all is lost. So there's no way forward, no way back, but your character can't really see the future yet. So there's a void. This could be a crisis, a loss. It could be death of a loved one. It could be a figurative death of old beliefs, for example. But it's really a loss of identity or where self-identity is in suspension. In The Glass Castle, there's this defining moment where she leaves her old life behind and starts on the new life in front of her. And it's where your protagonist is utterly alone with him or herself. Now, it could be a black moment or the dark night of the soul. It could be a moment of despair, but it can also be a positive thing. Even that should have some uncertainty attached to it. It's that place where your character's past is no longer, it's wiped out, there's no returning, but the future is also a void. So your character is suspended in this void between his or her past and the future, and he can't yet see the possibilities for his future. So your character is forced to make a choice, an internal shift, but the future is unknown territory. For Jeanette Walls, that moment is when she finally leaves her parents on Little Hobart Street. She's 17. Now, her mother refuses to see her off. She's too hurt. And obviously, this was not an easy thing for Jeanette Walls to do. But her dad does take her to the bus station. He insisted on carrying the suitcase for me, and we set off down Little Hobart Street and around the old road. The empty streets were damp. Every now and then, Dad would look over at me and wink, or make a talking sound with his tongue, as if I were a horse and he was urging me on. It seemed to make him feel like he was doing what a father should, plucking up his daughter's courage, helping her face the terrors of the unknown. When we got to the station, Dad turned to me. "Honey, life in New York may not be as easy as you think it's going to be." "I can handle it," I told him. Okay, so he gives her his favorite jackknife and he tells her he'll feel better knowing that she has it. The bus arrives, she slides in her luggage and hugs her dad. When our cheeks touched, I breathed in his smell of tobacco, Vitalis, and whiskey. I realized he'd shaved for me. "If things don't work out, you can always come home," he said. "I'll be here for you. You know that, don't you?" I know. I knew that in his way he would be. I also knew I'd never be coming back. Only a few passengers were on the bus, so I got a good seat next to a window. The driver closed the door, and we pulled out. At first, I resolved not to turn around. I wanted to look ahead to where I was going, not back at what I was leaving, but then I turned anyway. Dad was lighting a cigarette. I waved, and he waved back. Then he shoved his hands in his pockets, the cigarette dangling from his mouth, and stood there, slightly stoop-shouldered and distracted-looking. I wondered if he was remembering how he, too, had left Welch full of vinegar at age 17 and just as convinced as I was now that he'd never return. I wondered if he was hoping that his favorite girl would come back, or if he was hoping that, unlike him, she would make it out for good. I reached into my pocket and touched the horn-handled jackknife, then waved again. Dad just stood there. He grew smaller and smaller, and then we turned a corner, and he was gone. Okay, so threshold number 3, there's that all is lost moment when there's no coming back, but the future is also a void. Okay, on to threshold number 4, the climax. This is where your character will go head to head with whatever antagonistic forces are at play. And this results in triumph of some sort. It could be a redemption, but even if they lose someone, there's going to be some payoff at the end. Now, the climax for Jeanette Walls is when her dad dies from a heart attack. When I got to the hospital, he was in a bed in the emergency room, his eyes closed. Mom and Lori were standing next to him. It's just the machines keeping him alive at this point, Mom said. I knew Dad would have hated that, spending his final moments in a hospital hooked up to machines. He'd have wanted to be out in the wild somewhere. He always said that when he died, we should put him on a mountaintop and let the buzzards and coyotes tear his body apart. I had this crazy urge to scoop him up in my arms and charge through the doors to check out Rex Wall style one last time. Instead, I took his hand. It was warm and heavy. An hour later, they turned the machines off. Now, this is great because it's a full circle moment here. Remember, the inciting event that led to her point of no return was being in the hospital at age 3. So again, it's an event that leads to ultimate change. She comes out of the other side stronger, but it's not instantaneous. In the months that followed, I found myself always wanting to be somewhere other than where I was. If I was at work, I'd wish I were at home. If I was in the apartment, I couldn't wait to get out of it. If a taxi I had hailed was stuck in traffic for over a minute, I got out and walked. I felt best when I was on the move, going someplace rather than being there. Notice that she falls into old patterns established by her parents who were always on the move in her childhood, the very thing she fought to escape. So it's a full circle moment. It's the final confrontation with the antagonistic forces in her life. Now, at this point, she's a successful journalist, but she's still not completely on the other side of her past. A year later, after her dad's death, she leaves her husband, she leaves Park Avenue, and she moves to the West Side. And she says, my compulsion to be always on the move began to fade. So she comes to terms with her parents here. She comes to terms with her past. So there's triumph. She's remarried, and at the end, she and her siblings and her mother reunite for Thanksgiving. This is where the story resolves. As we sat down for dinner, Mom told us her good news. She had been a squatter for almost 15 years, and the city had finally decided to sell the apartment to her and the other squatters for $1 apiece. She couldn't accept our invitation to stay a while, she said, because she had to get back for a board meeting of the squatters. We started talking about some of Dad's great escapades, letting me pet the cheetah, taking us demon hunting, giving us stars for Christmas. We should drink a toast to Rex, John said. Mom stared at the ceiling, miming perspective thought. I've got it. She held up her glass. Life with your father was never boring. We raised our glasses. I could almost hear Dad chuckling at Mom's comment in the way he always did when he was truly enjoying something. It had grown dark outside. A wind picked up, rattling the windows, and the candle flame suddenly shifted, dancing along the border between turbulence and order. Okay, so she emerges on the other side stronger, a more realized version of herself. But it was hard-won. Okay, let's recap. There are 4 thresholds your character will move through as they move through their transformation, as they move through the plot. Here are those 4 thresholds to help you plot your character-driven story. Number 1, the point of no return. This happens at the end of Act 1. Number 2, the midpoint. This is halfway through your second act. It's the mirror moment where they have to recommit to the main story goal. Threshold number 3, the all is lost moment. There's no going back to the past, but the future still feels like a void. And number 4, the climax. This is the final confrontation with the antagonistic forces within. I hope these 4 thresholds help you chart your character's journey. This is really helpful when your character's conflict isn't something obvious like a tsunami or a war or something external. However, these are still helpful if your story is more plot-driven. Your character will still go through these 4 thresholds on the way to the final resolution. Number 1, point of no return. Number 2, the midpoint. Number 3, all is lost. Number 4, the climax. So there you have it. Thanks for hanging out with me today. And if you know any writers who need some support in their writing, please share this episode or the Writer Unleashed podcast in general. And if you love what you're listening to, subscribe on your favorite listening platform and please leave me a review. Reading how this podcast impacts your writing truly lights me up and helps me create topics for the show. Till next time, keep writing, and I'll talk to you soon.